and welcome to Be Our Guest, our weekly virtual happy hour with industry professionals. I am Janki, Artistic Director of Live and in Color. We are an artist-serving organization dedicated to developing new stage works that promote and celebrate diversity. June is our month of giving, so all donations made over the next month will be matched dollar for dollar up to $10,000. So please make a tax-deductible donation today to support our artists by going to liveandincolor.org right now, and you can double your impact today. Now, grab a cocktail and start leaving questions for our wonderful guests in the comments. Please welcome an amazing actor, activist, aerialist, consultant, pianist, public speaker, puppeteer, singer, writer, and Live and in Color board member, the amazing Samy Nour Younes Figaredo.
Hi. Oh my God, mira que fancy. This is the first time I'm seeing the side by side.
Yes. Welcome. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining me. Where are you joining us from?
From the Upper East Side, 90th and 2nd.
All right. Have you been has that been your home base for the past 15 months?
Just about. My partner and I moved in together like at the start of the pandemic. We signed the lease, and then within a couple days, everything started shutting down, and we had to decide if we were going to stay or not. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Is New York originally home for you? Where are your roots?
Yeah, no, I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland. It's like just outside of the DC area.
Yeah.
Grew up mostly there, PG County. As an adult, kind of moved over to Baltimore. And so for me, Baltimore is really home. I think it's where a lot of formative experiences happened for me. And I feel like a Baltimore person. And then I moved here in 2018. It feels like just yesterday and also 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, a lot's happened in those 3-4 years, whatever it is, you know. It's been a crazy, crazy time in our lives. So the understatement of the year. So I always start, asking our guests about, where they started. And so as a young person, what first inspired you to pursue a career in the arts?
Oh my gosh. It's so funny. It's a good question. I've been asked before, and it feels like it's been something that was so embedded in my life that it's so hard to pick an event, right? Not even in the sense that, because growing up, my dad's Lebanese, my mom's Puerto Rican. My mother is a U.S. citizen. Nobody knows in America, Puerto Rico's in America. But she was a citizen, right? And my dad was not. But he was convinced that raising a family here was the best, land of opportunity. And so growing up, I mean, I'm incredibly proud of the things that my parents have achieved. It was like a rough start. And so getting access to like an arts education wasn't necessarily something I had, unless it was like an after school program or like a community group like that. But I did have that, right? So I did have like after school dance, and I did have community theater. And I think that like the defining moment when I was a kid in terms of realizing I had like an obsession, with the art, because I feel like it was around me in however it could have been at the time, but and I liked it and I had fun. But when I realized it was an obsession, was when weirdly my parents got us the Nintendo Entertainment System. And because it was 3 of us, my youngest sister wouldn't come until 14 years later, because it was 3 of us, and that's a lot of gifts. It would just be like one gift that everyone has to share. No one's sharing the Nintendo. But there was this really weird game called the Miracle Piano System, and it came with its own controller that was essentially like a miniature keyboard, and it would teach you how to play piano. And I was obsessed with that. I loved games. I like completion. And so I was like, okay, I need to complete this. And then I beat as much as the game would teach you. And but I can't stop playing with, I don't care about the game actually anymore. I care about, I'm making music. I feel like this is a channeling for my passion and my emotions, even as a kid. And there was a clear event, like when I was maybe 8 or 9, that I was still playing with it, and got into a fight with my older sibling because they sort of like get the gift first and then everyone has to pass it down. And I don't even think they were that interested in the toy. I think they were just mad that I was playing with it. We had a fight and they said something like, oh yeah, well, I mean, you're not even good at it anyway. And, you know, my mom was like, you really like that thing, don't you? I said, yeah, it's kind of my favorite thing in the house right now. And then she said, like, what if your grandparents could like eventually get you a piano for real? And you could eventually learn. And I loved that. I would say by the time I was 13, I did have an actual piano and I did have start going to actual lessons. And I mean, that's actually, you know what, that's just one. I feel like I could come back to this at 3 a.m. and be like, Dev, I know what it was.
Well, since, you know, we're speaking for the show, your love is theater, right? Your love is to be on stage. Do you remember what your first show was that you saw? Yeah,
actually, no, the first musical I ever saw live was Cats, because it was touring and it was in DC, and it was again one of those things that like my parents knew nothing about it. My mom is actually a really big musical theater fan. They knew nothing about Cats. They just knew, well, Sammy likes Cats. Let's just take the kids to go see it. And I was actually really obsessed. You know what? I'm going to go say Cats was my formative I love musical moment, because I still remember there's a moment in the show pretty early on where a shoe drops from the ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
And for some reason, it's that. And then there's like the scene in Skimbleshanks where everyone assembles a train out of the junk. And it was that like, I mean, first of all, it's a spectacle of singing, dancing, acting, tumbling, all kinds of stuff. But it was those moments that for some reason I had this visceral reaction as a child of like, I want to do that. And that looks incredible. Like just the mind blown, like now as an adult, having worked in theater, I've never worked on Cats, girl. I don't have the range.
You'd be a great musician. You'd be really good.
Would love that. Actually, probably the only one I'm qualified to do. But like as an adult, knowing how the sausage gets made behind stage, you know, it's not lost all of its magic. But when I was a kid, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And everything was so cool. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm going to say that was it.
I love it. I love it. That was one of my first as well. So
really,
people, you know, and I got to do it much later, and people always sort of make fun of Cats, especially since that movie came out. But we won't talk about it. But the original show definitely had that impression on a lot of people. It really was magical, especially for young people. And all those things you spoke about are so true.
Yeah.
You know, I want to jump to many years later. I don't know if it's many years later, but you started a career as an actor, and I know, you know, done a lot of things. Most recently, pre-pandemic, was your amazing performances Into the Woods at the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. There you are. You got to work with our dear friend and Peter Flynn on that. What was it like getting to perform such a classical musical? I mean, you know, it's one of the greats. So,
I mean, emotional on multiple levels. Because one, I don't know that I have like bucket list roles anymore. But back when I did, Jack was absolutely one of them. And there was absolutely, I'm 34 now. And there was like, by the time I was casted Into the Woods, I was like, I don't even know that I'm young enough to do this anymore. I think I've aged out. I also, side note, if I had any bucket list role, I feel like I would like to age through every male role in the show, because I really love it. But Into the Woods for me as a show, whether or not, you know, I am in it as a show, it's in and of itself, has meant so much to me at different ages of my life, because I feel like I understood a little more about it the older I got. You know, I think I was a teenager the first time I was exposed to it. And I certainly understood at the basic level this concept of, okay, act 1, everyone wishes for something. Act 2, you're not necessarily happy with what you've got, and you've got to deal with the consequences of how you got it. And then as I got older, and not even that much older, but like by the time I was in college, the theme that really struck me was, for me, it was like generational trauma almost. I don't know. I know that sounds really heavy, but you know, the idea that the parents or the older adult generation for each of the main storylines, however well-intentioned they might be, is messing up somehow on behalf of this younger generation. And this younger generation goes and carries out really stupid things kind of as a result of what they think they either have to do, or they don't know better, or that's absolutely what they want to do, and the end justifies the means. And, you know, this idea of like having to break that cycle and this relationship between parents and children. And then like, as I got older, new themes of, one thing that we explored a lot actually with Peter was concepts of like just the morality of the show. And that's something that I would actually, in rehearsal, think a lot about with Jack is Jack a bad person? And kind of settling on no, but he's also not great. But that's also like, I think one of the lovely things about that show is that it is very murky, and that this sort of desperate need to find fault in someone after something has gone wrong. Never mind that it is a little bit of everyone's fault, and everyone's greed or motivations had something to do with it. And no matter how it started, like either we make a conscious decision to do different and end this, or, you know, or it keeps happening.
I mean, it's one of those shows that, you know, everyone
will always
has an interpretation of it and finds something like really resonant, and you know, it's, you know, the gift that keeps on giving, just in terms of analysis and meaning. I know you were incredible in it, so, you know, and I think you'll be playing that role for years to come. You still can passes.
I'm happy. I will say I'm happy I got to do it when I did. I feel like I was at a place in my life where even like Giants in the Sky like held different meaning to me. You know, it's always this, I love the number. It's always been this great like pivotal moment for him where he discovers there's so much more in the world than what he knew just back home. And for me, it kind of meant something a little different, where I feel like I told this to Peter in the room. I kind of likened it to my own coming out, and this search for a community that I didn't even know existed. And then you get wrapped up in this community and a world of possibility and riches and wonder and experience and knowledge is suddenly open to you. And then you come back home and your parents are waiting for you, realizing that they're actually never going to be a part of that world. And that doesn't mean you love them less. It just means that, you know, when you come back, you're a little different, and they may never exactly know why. For better or for worse, like they're just never going to know why you're a little bit different. And that, for some reason, like that was what hit me at the time that we were rehearsing for Ford's. Who knows if I ever do it again? Knock on wood, inshallah. You know, who knows what'll hit me. Such
a beautiful, you know, connection to it, and completely makes sense. You know, I totally get it. You know, you are the true definition of a multi-hyphenate artist. You do so many things. How do you maintain a career specializing in so many different disciplines? Like, you are always doing a million things. I can't keep a track of everything you're doing every time I talk to you.
Well, I mean, it's so funny, and I feel like my answer is different now post-pandemic, because you know, when it comes to certain performance skills, especially aerial work, which I actually, for as often as I've been doing it, I think I've only ever done it once on stage. Back in Baltimore in 2013, when I just got started on it. It's one of those things where, like, if a performance doesn't call for that skill, well, then how do you exercise that muscle? You know, and pre-pandemic, I was frequently still taking classes. You know, I would do silks, but also like trapeze, and try and keep that muscle active and exercised. I haven't done it actually since in about a year and a half now. I know that some of the studios are starting to open, but I know for a lot of people, there's still that hesitancy of like, if one person coughs and then touches the fabric, everyone everyone's going to get sick. You know, it's, I think that there's still a little hesitancy there. But God, in terms of keeping them all active, I think I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Because I just love them all equally. And when I think about like where I want to go artistically, I really just love art for the creation of it. And I, you know, whether that is, I've created one solo cabaret to date. I don't know that I'll do another just yet, because I actually still want to tweak the first. But, you know, whether it's creating my own, but especially kind of being a vehicle to help bring somebody else's to life. Nothing, you know, and this is why kind of, I don't really have bucket list roles anymore, because while there are shows I would love to be in and roles I would love to play, I think that nothing really energizes me more than being on board for something new. And specifically like subscribing to the passion that whatever artist, creative team has for that thing. And just wanting to see the world the way that they do. That I just get really excited when I create something new. And so I end up just kind of throwing myself, like, I will collaborate with anyone who wants to collaborate with me. So that kind of just has me doing so many different things.
Well, I know you're, you know, on one hand of it, you're on stage and performing, but I know you are behind the scenes a lot doing the business side of things, and you understand that as well. How do you know, being both on the artistic and the business side, the industry, how does that inform each other? Like, is that helpful for you? Is it, you know?
It's definitely helped me survive. I mean, on a very practical level, it's definitely helped me survive when like opportunities to perform are few and far between. Yeah. But I think that it ends up being a little bit of, it's kind of how I got here, right? Because so while I was kind of exposed to art at a young age, I had access to like actually consume and learn art at a youngish age. In terms of being supported when I like wanted to go off to college and study art, you know, and I had cycled through a couple like that I was just really passionate about, whether it was like a piano performance, theater was a big one, even illustration, which I had been doing. When it came time to make that, I was like, I want this to be my degree. I want the degree in this. I didn't have the sort of communal support that I had been looking for, because there's still a real cultural bias against art as real work, unfortunately. And so I kind of went into my second greatest love, which is like language, culture, and history. And that would end up kind of coming back later. But the way I kind of had to get myself back into art was that when I graduated with the degree I finally got, it was also around the time of the recession. There weren't any jobs in that. The only available thing that I applied to and got accepted for was an internship at a performing arts organization. You know, and then I got back into that world and like really realized how much I missed it, and started, you know, as I could afford it, educating myself and taking classes on the side, and being able to go to like acting schools in DC, of which there are a few. And so I think that being able to do both has just kind of been the story of my life, that I ended up back here for a reason. And then there is that practical, like when acting isn't as, it's not really as busy for me. Love you, Lori. When it isn't as busy for me, then I do a lot of grant writing with arts organizations, even back home in the DMV and here as well. And then it also, every now and then, gives me a good insight kind of on the behind the scenes of a when and why certain decisions get made within any production. It actually kind of helps me most often when I'm looking for new work, and it helps, you know, everyone tells you when you're auditioning not to take things too personally, and you have to get used to rejection. And I know that, but kind of coming from the backstage part, well, it's so easy to actually practice that, because when you see what goes on behind the scenes, that kind of leads to what happens in any production. It's easier to not let those emotions get a hold of me.
It's so true. When you get to see the bigger picture of it, you definitely, I always say, when I wish I knew half the stuff I knew now when I was starting out as an actor, I wouldn't have made myself so crazy, because, you know, as actors, we're very myopic in terms of like, you know,
and it's hard, you know, like
hard,
especially like if you have a long spell, like, you know, even last year where I was like, nothing's coming through. And the rational part of me knows that's because nothing is happening. But there's still a part of you when you're just like cooped inside, like, am I a bad actor? Why isn't there anything?
Well,
Yeah.
it's so impressive what, you know, everything you're doing. It really is inspiring. So outside of your work in the theater, you are a passionate activist for trans rights. You even did your very own TED Talk, which I adored, which we're going to show a little clip here. For
Why are transgender people suddenly everywhere? As a trans activist, I get this question a lot. Keep in mind, less than 1% of American adults openly identify as trans. According to a recent GLAAD survey, about 16% of non-trans Americans claim to know a trans person in real life. So for the other 84%, this may seem like a new topic, but trans people are not new. Gender variance is older than you think, and trans people are part of that legacy.
For everyone watching, go check that TED Talk out. It's really one of the most incredible ones that I have seen. Tell me about how that came about, and you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
The residency or just like the trans history bit?
Or any part of it, like the TED Talk, or like, I mean, I know it's a big part of your, you know, your mission in life. So
it's so funny. Yeah. So I feel like that's a 3-parter, and I promise I won't ramble. I know I do that a lot. But, you know, in terms of the activism, which I think came first, and the fellowship would not have come second, no matter how much later, I feel like I became an activist kind of because I had to be. Where I grew, I mean, even in the DMV, there actually are a lot of other trans people. There are a lot of trans people of color. But I wasn't really clued into that world. And I didn't have access to that world. And growing up, and especially like within the neighborhood and city and community that I did, I was definitely made to feel like there really is the only one of me. And it's so weird and abnormal that if I am the only one of me, then this isn't right. You know, you gotta change or fix this. And even as I met more LGBTQ plus people, I still was kind of like searching for the me in there. And then even as I finally came out as trans, and as I started to transition, well, you know, when other people would see me, they felt kind of, it sucks, but entitled to ask or make questions or comments, especially, you know, with the end result being that as I walk outside, I kind of have to defend every little thing about the trans community. And this was like, as I'm first exploring the world, you know, not as a trans person, because you know, you are trans whether you transition or not, but as my body is changing, it's like hitting a second puberty and everything is new and different and you're figuring so much more out. And people are asking me all kinds of like big picture questions about the trans community and trans rights and why they should even care, that I really wish I could have just been like, I don't know, like, just give me the time to figure it all out for myself as well. Like, give me the time to figure myself out and come back to you with everything you're asking me for. But I didn't, you know, if you ever were to say something like that, or, you know, what I started doing pretty quickly was like, you know, educate myself on all statistics and legislation and current events. If I just didn't have an answer, the way that certain people, especially if they were anti-trans or leaning that way to begin with, the response or the attitude would be like, oh, you don't know, therefore there is no answer. Therefore, I have seen through this myth of trans identity, and I don't have to listen to you anymore. And it was a really heavy burden because I knew, you know, especially as I started going to more support groups, and then through that getting connected to organizers on the grassroots level, it hurt knowing that even though I don't want to speak for the entire community, and even though I don't feel like I'm qualified to speak for the entire community, I know that my failing to address whatever they have asked me to address means that they're going to go see an entire community that way. And actually, it made me pissed off, but it also like that anger just kind of meant like, I'm going to arm myself with everything and you will never get that from me again. I'm going to make myself active so that you can't find, you know, you can't like point to me and say that you're the only one and you're so weird, because I'm so connected to all these other people. flash forward. In 2018, I applied for the TED residency, which is it was about 4 months long at the TED headquarters, which is in Soho. And they basically, you apply with an idea worth spreading. That's like the TED logo or TED tagline. And I applied. By that point, I had already I don't consider myself a trans historian because I feel like I wish I had more knowledge and more expertise in order to call myself a historian of anything. But I certainly call myself an advocate for the learning of like LGBTQ plus history. I find it really important. And so when I applied, I said, I really want to talk about how do we even identify and document that kind of history, because it's so complicated. As terms evolve, the ways that we talk about sex and gender and sexuality evolve. The further you go back in time, it's not as easy as getting someone who says, I'm a lesbian or I'm bisexual. How then do you go about the work of identifying a potentially historical trans, lesbian, gay, bisexual figure? That was what I applied with. And then they got back to me and they seemed interested in that, but they were like, wait a second, what do you mean trans history? And I was like, wait, you don't know about some things that I considered by that point, just because I was immersed in it. Like, I thought that was like pretty widely known. I thought that was pretty fundamental. I thought that like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were more widespread than it turns out they actually are. And so when they did accept me, but as I was going through, I remember, so the residency basically walks you through how to give a TED Talk. Now it is a truncated TED Talk. You can't go over 5 or 6 minutes. But they walk you through all of the research, and you have the access to the same research tools that they do. When you're preparing your presentation, acquiring the rights, and then when you're actually writing the speech, what does a TED Talk look like in terms of the performance of it, and all of those things. So my first draft was like 13 minutes. They were absolutely like, that's not happening. But it was more that original idea of how do we preserve and identify trans history. And I gave that to my peers because the residency had like 20 something people in it. And, even though I knew from that initial interview before I was even accepted that people might not know trans history, I kind of plowed ahead with what I was already working on and got absolutely like people who didn't even know where to begin with that. And I'm like, okay, I need to begin at not a 101, because I don't mean to patronize people. It's just not a history that we teach. But I needed to begin at a real entry level in terms of just getting people to understand that trans identity is older than they think. And then trying to sneak in a little bit about, here's how we identify that. But because it was only 5 minutes, I had to cut a lot out. And it ended up just kind of being more of a very brief overview of trans history, and then trying to end it on like a call to action of, I need people to understand why learning any history is so important, with any sort of marginalized group, that is vulnerable or facing attack, as trans people are, but as many people are. If you don't understand the history of that community and how long they've been fighting for equality, it's really easy to dismiss and sort of be like, why are you so angry? Wait your turn, and all kinds of stuff like that. And when you, my hope is that when people learn more about it, that there is a little more urgency to it.
Absolutely.
My cat's food feeders just went off, and so they're scrambling. But that, and that has become strangely, like that was 3 years ago. That's strangely become more relevant. In 2021 alone, there have been more proposed anti-trans bills in the United States than in the past decade combined. It's really serious. And it's like, when you consider that we're less than 1% of the US population, it's like, why are we going so hard on this serious of a minority? Nobody should be the target of anything, but like, why have we become this like scaremongering, this scapegoat for a lot of these bills, this legislation? And so I feel even more passionate about educating people about the history, to get them more invested in the present.
Well, I have to say that was so good. I mean, I could talk all night with you, but we're sort of running out of time. But which is fine. It's totally fine. But I encourage everyone to check it out because it's so beautifully done, and it really does inspire you to learn more. You know, it does exactly what you said. You know, your activism is so inspiring to me and to so many people. You know, again, this is going to be we could talk forever about this, but just what are some effective ways in which the theater industry can be advocates for the trans community? I know that's a big topic, but
it is a big topic, but I'm very glad you asked, because I'm glad you asked because, one, when I tell people about the strides that kind of need to be made for trans people in the industry, I think that there's a little bit of hesitancy because we still sort of subscribe to this idea of, I don't understand why we care so much about trans actor, trans role. The best actor gets the part, right? And if you work behind the scenes, you know it's not necessarily always about that. There could be a number of reasons why one person gets a part over another, and that it's not always the most talented person equals star of the show. You know, it just doesn't work that way. But I try to frame it for people in terms of understanding from an equity lens. You know, I obviously have very strong feelings on the trans people need to tell our stories, but because, you know, that one's a hard one to convince people on for some reason. The one that I really love to, you know, impart, you know, sort of like the point I really like to make is that, you know, across the board, transgender people face higher levels of or underemployment. We've known that for several years, if not decades now. We're doing emerging kind of research into like what influences that and what kind of biases play into that. With, I think, like the most recent studies that we have now, even though they haven't been done on a large enough scale, they all seem to indicate that a cisgender employer will absolutely overlook a very qualified trans applicant in favor of a perhaps average or less qualified cisgender applicant, just because of personal bias. So we know that that's at least part of it. Within the theater industry, I mean, the research is even more limited. The only thing that I do know for sure is that, you know, the Actors Equity Association's most recent diversity report, which I think covers 2016 to 2019, stated that there were roughly 96,000, if I'm getting that wrong, I'm so sorry. It was in the tens of thousands, closer to 100,000 equity contracts issued to actors for equity productions across the country. And of those, less than, I believe, it was certainly less than 1% went to trans people. I'm gonna look that up to make sure that I got that right.
I have no doubt that that's pretty near the you know.
Yeah, and so there's that aspect of like, you know, I would love to get to the point where trans people, we really do get seen for any role. I think that is something that is revolutionary in a quiet way, because when it happens and it happens well, we don't think about it. It's only when anything happens and it goes wrong, then we interrogate. But like for example, you know, Jack in Into the Woods is not by any means a trans role. It's not like whether this person is cis or trans, it actually doesn't matter. But the fact that I'm able to go out and compete for it makes a difference. And the fact that like Peter would consider me along with any other actor, and it really doesn't matter that I'm trans, is more important than it sounds. Like, it almost sounds so mundane that nobody cares that I'm trans, but I really wish nobody cared and that I could apply for whatever.
Well, that's you know, really the dream, right? That's what theater can do.
Yeah. There's a lot to do, yeah. Within theater spaces or arts organizations, I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of equity and inclusion, not just for trans people, but for lots of communities. But I would say, kind of at a fundamental level, within the theater industry, I really encourage people to sort of make more space for transgender actors and consider them as equal contenders, even though they may not come of the same background that a qualified cisgender actor might. A transgender person who is struggling to pay for their transition or their housing may not have the money to go get a BFA. Or a trans person who is struggling with job insecurity may not have the time to go to the same institution that, you know, that another like comparable cisgender actor might. But at least consider them. At least, you know, like, we need resources for folks to be able to advance and have access and not have money or gender or other factors be an issue. And it feels like a lot of the things that I could say in terms of making a more equitable environment and workspace for trans people kind of apply to everybody, honestly, in terms of leveling the playing field. I'm not going to ramble. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Let's quickly, because we have a bunch of questions. Let's take some questions quickly, because we are any of your tattoos inspired by roles on stage? Great question.
It's a good question, and they're not. And it's funny because I've had this love-hate relationship in entertainment with my tattoos, where it's either people absolutely don't want to see them, or they're probably the only reason I got cast. They have personal meaning for me. They're actually all one piece. And my cat is in the sink. I will deal with him later. I would be happy to tell you the story of my tattoos at a later date, because that's its own journey. But they weren't. This one's almost done. It's a large piece, covers the chest, the arms, and my back. And once that one is finished, I really want to touch up the color. Once that one is finished, I actually do have some that I want to get based on productions I've done. But this time and money, and I'm running out of real estate, so
let's take another question. What advice do you share with young actors starting out in the industry? I think first of all, education and training is really important, no matter how you get it. Regardless of, I know we talked about maybe not everyone can afford the BFA, or life circumstances don't take you that way, but it's so important no matter what to really educate yourself on the history and the legacies of the institution that you want to enter, as well as to really learn about different techniques. Educating yourself however possible, that is valid and worth pursuing. But once, as you are getting into the industry and you're just starting out, connections are everything. But I would love to encourage people to, because I think that at least I've encountered certain people in the entertainment industry who kind of come from an old guard. If you're not bleeding and sweating and crying for this, you're not a real artist. And I would really like to see people in the arts long term. And if you are constantly exploiting and exhausting yourself that way, you won't last that long. And so be kind to yourself, be kind to your body, be assertive. But also when it comes to making connections, I would encourage you to really not do it with the typical lens of knowing this person is going to benefit me later, so let me use them, but showing up as your best, authentic self, and being able to make connections based on the strength of your character as well as your work. I think that goes a long way. There are so many negative personalities in theater and in the industry in general that whenever I encounter them, there's this sort of attitude of, oh, this is how we do it. This is the industry. If you can't handle this, get out. And I don't want the industry to always be like that. Authenticity goes a long, long way. So let's take one last question. Okay. What will your next TED Talk be about, Thank you, Samy?
From your keyboard to whatever, God's screen. I don't know. I actually have applied again because I want to do the kind of 201 talk that I had done before. But I also want to talk about, I'm gonna be hitting beating a dead horse with the history thing.
Well, there's so much more. There, in 5 minutes, that's just like
listen. For me, I wanted to do a sort of separate talk about how important it is to see yourself in that history, and to understand that you really are part of a legacy, and that you either carry it forward or you decide what you get to do with it. It helps you on so many ways. Like for me, it helped me feel less alone. It helped me be better educated when I had to, interact with other people. It gave me, I feel like learning. I mean, history, yes, I'm being very specific here because I love it, but education in general, and accepting that I just don't, there's so much out there I don't know, has kind of set the tone for every other platform or stance that I've had in life. and the compassion with which I treat other people. And I'm not saying that because like, oh, I'm so saintly. No, I just like, when I understand that there's so much more in life I don't know, then I don't really rush to judge other people. And that leads to its own things. When I understand there's so much more in life I don't know, I'm not as deeply wedded to certain beliefs or ideologies, because I understand that there's something out there that could convince me otherwise. When I, and so on and so forth. So yes, I would love to talk so much more about how like seeing yourself as part of a legacy matters. I don't know. That's a good question.
We have to keep a lookout for it, and hopefully the sequel is
if
there.
You don't have to back, I'll go back.
Samy, we are out of time.
Okay,
but as we mentioned earlier, all donations made during this month will be matched dollar for dollar up to $10,000. Please make a tax-deductible donation today to support the work of the artists at Live and in Color by going to liveandincolor.org right now. All money raised goes towards our amazing artists in developing their new work. Next week, join us when we chat with Live and in Color alum from Broadway's If Then in Hamilton, the amazing Mark de la Cruz. You won't want to miss it. To see more episodes of Be Our Guest, please make sure to like us on Facebook and subscribe to us. Samy, I am your biggest fan. Thank you for being with us today. I can't wait for more conversations, more collaboration. And as we go, would you mind leading us a little toast to send us off?
Oh my gosh. What do people normally say?
Whatever is on your mind, you know.
You know what? Thank you all so much for being here. Obviously, it is Pride Month, and in the spirit of Pride, I want you to embody that in whatever way makes sense to you and carry that love and kindness out into the world.
Hear, hear. Happy Pride, everyone.
Y'all.